Good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for having us. My colleagues and I were here today to talk about developing retrofit strategies, and we'll probably kickstart with some introductions. So my name is Megan Waller. I'm the Strategic Business Manager for Housing and Regeneration. My colleague Jonathan is also here.
Hi everyone, just to introduce myself, I'm the Strategic Business Consultant focusing on housing regeneration, working very closely with Megan. Really great to be here today.
Hi there, I'm Gwyn Roberts. I'm a Principal Consultant in our Strategic Advisory team.
Thanks. Next slide, please, John. So we thought it would be useful just to give a really quick introduction to who are BRE, for those of you who might not know us. So BRE, we've been at the coalface of building science for 100 years. We're coming up to our 100-year anniversary. We offer a range of physical testing, research, advisory services, along with a range of assurance schemes and standards through BREEAM. And we also offer training for a range of specialities and topics through our academy section. So today we plan on focusing on a key range of aspects in terms of delivering energy efficiency improvements across your stock. First off, identifying your stock and knowing what you've got to work with, moving through to then strategy development, and then looking at options for sustainability assurance and benchmarking. We've also got a section at the end to pick up on funding available and finance options, which will include the Green Homes Grant and Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund pilot, which is currently live. Next slide, please, John. So why retrofitting? Many of us are spending our times at home, especially now in light of COVID-19. But prior to that, we spent around 90% of our time inside. But this isn't just about energy efficiency. There are many other factors that come into consideration when we're talking about healthy homes and how we sustain our homes for longer term, such as well-being, ensuring that they work for us and that they are also cost effective to run adequately and ensure that we've got the heat that we require inside. Next slide, please, John. So we're probably all familiar with how this property looks on some of our streets. This is considered to be the home of 2050, as 99.9% of the homes that we have now will probably be around between 1 year to the next. And this is really to do with focusing on the existing stock that we've got and what we can do with it to improve it so that it's suitable for the future and that we're not returning in 5-10 years time to do further measures to rectify anything that's been done in that time period prior to then. So if we move on to the next slide now, please, John, we'll talk about where we've kind of come from and take a look at where sort of English housing began. So BRE have been involved in the English Housing Survey. It was also known as the English House Condition Survey since 1967 when it began. At the time, there were 15.7 million homes in England and Wales. And as you can see on your screens, many of these were in what we would now refer to as a poor condition, with no indoor toilets or lacking basic amenities such as kitchen facilities and toilets and bathing facilities. And 12% of those were deemed to be unfit for habitation. They also had significant repair costs. 5% of those were having repair costs exceeding £1,000, which in equivalent terms in 2017 was about £17,000. So it's a considerable amount of cost to improve. And as you can see on there, 40% of these dwellings were built prior to 1919. So they are older properties that we are looking at. If we move over to the next slide, we can have a look at what the housing sort of looks like today. So currently we are, this picture on the screen here offers an English level approach, looking at a range of dwelling types and constructions across England and the sorts of places that you might see these sorts of dwellings. There are currently 24.2 million homes in the country, and it's expected that the cost of poor housing is 1.5 billion. The cost of poor housing is attributed to the cost to mitigate the likely hazards and disrepair or anything that might be failing decency in a property, attributed to also the costs to the NHS likely to treat people living in poor conditions and the effects that that can have on them. For a bit of perspective, this was estimated to be 600 million in 2010, so there has been quite a significant increase in these costs in the last 10 years. We anticipate that 50% of our homes are over 50 years old and 20% are over 100 years old. So that kind of reflects the picture in the previous slide that shows us that there were a significant proportion of dwellings that were built prior to 1919. And as I've said, homes will have to last, for some considerable time, but at the current rate of change, it's suggested that homes will need to last 1,000 years. So what we really need to do is we need to understand how different buildings perform in terms of both environmentally and from a health standpoint, whilst also looking at how we can ensure that any improvements are done don't counteract any sort of trade one off for the other, and that both are always under consideration through any improvements works that we are doing. So where do we begin really? We need to be able to understand how best to improve the existing dwellings that we have, and sort of consider the sequencing of measures and how to apply measures that are both cost effective and also suitable for the particular dwelling that you're looking at. So looking at different types of building typologies. Just mainly to ensure that we don't cause issues later down the line, like I said, causing issues that could cause the running costs of a property to exceed, which would therefore outweigh the improvements that you've made to it for sustainability and environmental perspectives. But to do this, we first need to understand what we're working with, and specifically what our baseline performance of the stock currently looks like to be able to start to build a bigger picture. So if we move on to the next slide, please, John. So we've run a poll across the audience of this webinar, and here are the results. So the question was, how comprehensive would you consider the data that you hold in relation to the baseline performance of your housing stock? So this is essentially looking at what data you hold is mainly to do with EPCs, of which we know that not every dwelling always has an EPC, or at least a current EPC, or are we looking at more data in terms of energy performance? So the results here show that 52% of the participants suggested that they had partial coverage of data, and this could very well be that you have data at dwelling level for all of your housing stock, but there may be some gaps in some of that data. Some of you have very complete or near to being complete data sets, which is fantastic. And then as we move to limited or significant gaps, or perhaps it's just out of date data that we're working on from some of the publicly available data sets that might be out there. Next slide, please, John. So this essentially brings us on to what you can do to try and improve the amount of data that you hold and to try and inform some more information to do with the stock level data that you hold. BRE have been providing stock modelling services for many years, specifically for central government and local authorities and housing providers. And the data that's provided can often infill gaps, make inferences and extrapolate findings across whole stock areas to be able to help develop strategy. Some of the things on the screen here can help in terms of improving the identification of energy efficiency variables such as wall types, levels of loft insulation across an area. Looking to identify the likely household income bands, for instance. This again can be really useful when you're looking at targeting things like eco funding, or looking to identify potentially eligible households for things like Green Homes Grant or social housing decarbonisation fund work. The dwelling level data, it can also provide indications of the likely carbon emissions at dwelling levels. So this is a great way of being able to visualise and highlight where areas of higher concentration are likely to be in your areas, And that just makes targeting and planning programme of works much easier to be able to target smaller areas rather than going across a whole area in one go. There's also a way to identify households that are likely to be in fuel poverty, and this is using both the 10% and the low income, high cost definition to be able to determine those. And again, that's all really useful information when you're looking at using schemes such as Green Homes Grant, because these complement one another. And then we move on to things like being able to identify disrepair, maybe hazards to health in homes, but also being able to model likely improvements on dwellings. So, you know, what improvements would be necessary to bring this dwelling to an EPC band C or above? What would take it above the C band? You know, how much more would we need to do? And the likely costs that are attributed to those sorts of improvements. So all in all, this is a way to basically improve the data sets that are available to be able to then scope and move on to look at strategy development. Next slide, please, John. So we thought it would be helpful just to show some examples of how this is being used in practice in the real world. So Bolton Council, they wanted to understand the condition of their private sector housing stock specifically, and using the stock condition survey alternative, which is stock modelling, they were able to identify dwellings at risk of failing decency by predicting the presence of hazards, low-income households and households likely to be in fuel poverty. But what this data also allowed them to do was to target the households with health conditions that were also living in poor housing, so therefore likely to be at risk of further issues impacting their health and well-being. So, for instance, they looked at those occupying homes with COPD and also living in cold homes, where the two would not be compatible together and would likely cause poor health. And on the screen, you can see some of the sort of key headline results. So essentially, individual home improvement grants were provided, and 2,829 improvement measures were implemented across the stock. And it was estimated that there was £3 million worth of savings on health and social care over 5 years by improving the conditions of these homes. Therefore, it was anticipated that people living in these homes, had they have not, they would have obviously potentially become ill and moved to look for health and social care input. But by doing this and mitigating these hazards in the homes, they were able to save potentially health and social care over the 5 years, £3 million or thereabouts. And you can see a picture here of a before and after of somebody's bathroom being converted into a more accessible wet room space. Next slide, please, John. And finally, we have a little video clip here that we thought would provide another example of how data can be used to support home improvements, including maybe the identification of potentially eligible households for schemes such as the Green Homes Grant. Again, this kind of adds value to the data that organisations could have, may already have, and might be looking to build upon for the purposes of retrofitting and improving them. But it adds value because it can be used in other areas across the councils, across the housing organisations, housing providers, and it enables this data to then be used for future schemes to inform programmes of work and to identify where there may be areas worth targeted intervention. So we'll just play this clip for you now. Brilliant. So I'm going to pass over now to my colleague who's going to talk more about strategy development through this sort of customer journey that we're sort of moving through the life cycle of retrofitting.
Thank you, Megan. So once we understand more about your stock, what is the next point? What do we do next when on the journey to achieve those grand challenges of achieving net zero, looking at our aging population and that wider conversation as well? So John, if we could have the next slide. So as part of the live presentation, we did a a question, and the poll question that we asked was, how would you identify your current strategy position in relation to retrofit? And yeah, there's obviously quite a range of answers, but there seems to be nearly half of the people who responded who have a plan that is in development. As there's a couple who have got a strategy that's published and an action plan that's defined. There's some that are unsure, and then there's a good 33% who are still considering what their strategy might be. So yes, there's obviously quite a lot of work and quite a lot of thought that's currently going on in this space at the moment in terms of what next, what is that strategy. So how can we help? How can BRE help in this process? So I'm going to divide this into 4 areas of how we can support these activities. So firstly, understanding the market and the capacity. So that's looking at both local and national supply chains. The next area is that more detailed analysis in terms of actually what's going on with your actual dwellings, understanding where you've been as an organization and what can help going forward. Third area is tying that in with the wider and other grand challenges. So obviously energy efficiency is not the only issue on people's agenda. We've also got health and well-being, we've got aging population, and we obviously should not forget what's happening with cladding and the building safety program side as well. And then once we've looked at that, there's the final kind of monitoring of what's actually being done, providing some independent evaluation and review. So John, if we go on to the next slide. So just going to talk through a number of case studies of various bits and pieces that we've done in terms of work around this. So in terms of our market capacity review, a lot of this work is both replicable for both new development and also existing. So quite often technology can be used in homes, whether or not they're new or existing. So one of the things that we've been doing, we've been working with government on a Home 2030 innovation challenge. So Home 2030 is a government competition to design and deliver new homes to meet a number of policy objectives around what homes would look like in 2030. So this piece of work as part of the main competition is developing a innovation directory and an awards process. So this was kind of obviously pre-COVID, so we actually were able to have a load of people in a room together, and here's some of the key winners of some of the innovation prize. We've also worked at a local level, so understanding what products and services are available at a local level and how that can support businesses to move towards a net zero agenda. If we can move on to the next slide, please, John. And so then we need to get more into that detail. We realize that you can't just think about energy efficiency. You have to think more widely than just that pure energy efficient and that route to net zero. So a number of the kind of questions that we get asked are, well, how are we going to get to net zero? How are we going to maybe move from gas heating to electric heating? But then at the same time, how is that going to work for our occupants? How is that we have a lot of occupants who are at home all the time. Maybe they're not employed, or maybe they're older population that need to keep their homes warm for that period. how do we tie in things like PV? So that whole modelling side of things within our own bespoke tools of how we can model that is part and parcel of that approach. We know that over the years that not all strategies have always worked. So what's gone wrong in the past? What has not been delivered? Has there been quality issues? Has there been promises and it's not quite worked out? So that's very much part of the work, but then also joining together those key other challenges. So on the innovation park, we've got a number of homes that have been retrofitted to achieve other outcomes. So these homes that are pictured here have not only been retrofitted to be energy efficient, but the home on the left has been retrofitted to be dementia friendly. So you can see that there's wide doorways, there's kind of clear lines of sight from the bedroom to the living room. There's through the room that you can just see into. There's the bathroom, so the bathroom's always close by to everyone. It's also kind of bringing in technology as well. So we always think that passive design is the first starting point, but actually smart technology can help take things to the next level. So this building has movement sensors and CO2 sensors, which is linked to a smart system, and so care operators can understand, if a person's got up in the morning and gone about their daily routine, which might mean maybe they don't need such a long visit. Or on the other hand, if you notice that there hasn't been movement, or there's the CO2 levels are not what they normally would be, then maybe that's a potential urgent issue that needs to be looked at more quickly. And then on the other side, there's our flood resilient home. If we could just go back to that current slide, John, sorry. So that has been developed so that it is resistant to floodwater damage, so the flooding can come in and out. And that is working with the insurance industry to try and find the best ways of retrofitting and also taking into account flooding. So there's obviously a huge amount of homes and increasingly even a lot of our existing homes that are likely to be flooded. And there are ways of not just thinking about the energy efficiency angle, but also thinking about the flooding angle as well. If we can go on to the next slide now. So one of our key pieces of work that we're currently also working on is the Cornwall whole house retrofit. So this is part of a BAYES competition. And so PRP are the design architects. We've been supporting them through data analysis in terms of understanding and choosing which homes can be retrofitted. But then our real role in that is independent monitoring and review of the whole process to ensure that it's actually being delivered on what the client wants, which is Cornwall Local Authority. So it's obviously got a number of different aspects going on. We're looking at how those have been installed and then going on in terms of how they actually work for the occupant going forward. And I think that's it from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Gwyn. So to put all of this into sort of practice, though, and to start delivering sort of net zero carbon retrofit programs and really start making something happen with it, it's clearly going to take significant investment, and that's going to need to come from someone. Fortunately, we're sort of now arriving in this sort of space, both in terms of like public and government bringing forward lots of sources of funding, and also private funding sources are sort of emerging. So I think we're really sort of emerging into this space where there's lots of opportunities to actually implement these retrofit programs and also new build programs as well related to sustainability. So I'm going to sort of touch in this section a bit about what those possible sources of funding could be. So initially, just to kickstart things, this question we asked when we did the live version of this webinar, and we basically asked, do you think that having an industry recognised framework for assuring the sustainability of retrofit projects would help to accelerate the housing sector's push to net zero carbon? And so this question was really about understanding what people's views on sustainability frameworks and certification programs are, because there's obviously a lot of them out there, but they're particularly at the moment focused on new build properties. So we wanted to sort of gauge whether people thought that this sort of approach may be useful in a housing situation, particularly in relation to the retrofit of housing. And the spread of results shows that there was clearly quite a lot of different views in terms of this, but the general consensus was that something in this space, some sort of framework, some sort of benchmark for sustainability assurance would actually be a useful thing. And that sort of takes me on to this next part, which is really focused on highlighting that at BREEAM, at BRE, since 1990, we've provided frameworks for sustainability assurance and benchmarking through our BREEAM family of certification schemes. For those of you who don't know, BREEAM is sort of the Building Research Establishment Environmental Assessment Method, and it sort of assesses a range of different sustainability issues. It takes a holistic approach and considers a wide range of issues. But what's important about it is that they provide a recognised and agreed benchmark of what sustainability and more recently net zero carbon actually are and what they should be. And it provides a robust, there's a robust sort of approach behind that. Sort of everything we do is sort of monitored by the United Kingdom Accreditation Service. So there's a really robust approach in terms of the development of our schemes. And what this means is that investors and other people, private funders of developments, can have confidence in BREEAM certification and the label which it provides. And that's what we sort of have been trying to push for the last 30 years. And increasingly, we are seeing private funding come into this, and there's lots of relevant literature about the adoption of these new approaches, and there's even been a new scheme in Germany called the Certified Sustainable Housing Scheme, which is focused on organisational level sustainability of social housing providers. So we're starting to see a shift, and even just the other day there was actually a new report by the Green Finance Institute, which basically goes into a lot of detail around this and how finance could be unlocked. And big banks are already sort of getting behind this, such as Lloyds and NatWest Bank as well. So there's a real sort of sense that this is something which is happening, and this is something which is going to happen more of in the future. And with conversations around green mortgages, there's definitely an opportunity for more of this sort of green this private funding of sort of retrofit programs and so on. But perhaps more pressingly at the moment, we have a lot of public funding coming forward in this space. As you may have heard about, we got the Green Homes Grant, which is obviously a program which is offering vouchers to household owners and landlords to retrofit energy efficiency measures into their homes. And there's a local authority delivery aspect to this as well, which I'm sure you're aware of, and local authorities which have applied should now know whether they've been successful with that. So we were able to provide some support around that, and in terms of identifying eligible homes. And then there's the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund as well, which is very relevant at the moment because the deadline for submitting Expressions of interest for this are actually next Friday. And this is all about aiming to start decarbonisation of social housing over 2020 to 2021, and also in the process supporting green jobs as part of the COVID-19 recovery. The programme will support social landlords to demonstrate innovative approaches to retrofitting social housing at scale, and it hopefully mean warmer homes and more energy efficient homes, as well as a reduction of cost for bills in the future for the householders. So in terms of what BRE can offer in this space, we can basically provide a service including for both social housing organisations and local authorities to identify the baseline stock performance of your homes, and which can be used to inform planning and strategy development going forward, as Gwyn was mentioning, and finally we can sort of consider the technical feasibility of measures and sequencing of measures. One key thing to note is that with both of these, having worked for many years in these areas with many different local authorities, it's important to note that we can help if you're considering this but not sure on whether to do it and how you can take it forward. We do work with lots of different organisations, so we would be happy to help talk about bringing together consortiums if we know other organisations in your local area who might also be considering it. So please do get in touch if you think we could offer any sort of support in this area, and we'd be happy to help. You can find our details on this page, and yeah, we'd be very keen to sort of take the conversation forward. So thank you very much for your time, and that'll be it. Thank you.
So here to just take you through a little bit of detail about one of the different pilots that we've done to achieve the Fabric First approach. So as I say, my name is Mark Arnold, and I'm the head of technical strategic assets at the 13 Group. For those that don't know, a little bit about 13 is we were formed in 2017 from several housing associations into one larger company. We have around about 34,000 stock, 70,000 customers, 16,000 colleagues, ranging all the way through the northeast from the borders of Scotland down to York as our main operating areas. And our key drive is to obviously provide good quality homes and good areas to live in. So the current position of where we are now is we have around 34,000 stock. We have a projected spend of about 1.2 billion over our 30-year investment. We currently have 98.2% of our properties sitting at category C or better. We have 100% EPC of records. Our current CO2 production is around about 91,175 tonnes per year. Our energy demand is 443,270,979 kilowatts. And energy production for ourselves is about 10.25 million a year, and that's mainly from our existing PV panels that we have quite a significant number of. So what have we done so far? Well, we've done a lot of component pilots over the last sort of 5 to 6 years. We've installed around 750 air source heat pumps, which we've actually found to be quite good. I know there's some negative issues. 60 of the NEBA units, which we had issues with. We've got 57 ground source heat pumps. We've got 40 of the hybrid air source heat pumps, which also have a gas supply. We've got 2,500 properties with PV. We've got 14,000 properties that have whole house ventilation systems. We have around 3,000 homes that have EWI or IWI. We piloted a spray seal roof insulation to trial that product. We've now trialed sun amps for water heating, and we have done some integration of IoT into some of our properties to make them smart in the way that they work. So when we were looking at what we're going to do for decarbonisation, we've now made a decision that it is Fabric First to full house retrofit. So we're going to try and make the biggest impact to our customers, both on reduction of carbon, reduction of bills, but also in ensuring that the properties moving forward are fit for purpose. So that the properties are an aspirational place to live and meet the current and future demands of our customers. So understand that we've created a little bit of a loop that we follow. So we ensure that the property has high levels of insulation, that insulation has continuity throughout, that the property has airtightness, that we have correct ventilation. We then look to integrate new technologies, and we always ensure that we have desirable homes that meet the required standards. So for our asset planning approach, what we've done is we've developed a holistic survey, and we've done that in partnership with Savills. They've come on board and helped us to ratify what we've done and make sure that that is correct and the logic follows through. That allows us to understand the financial requirements of meeting the carbon neutrality, whilst also we create those desirable homes for our customers. But more importantly, it also takes into look the infrastructure wider. So it looks at whether or not we've got capabilities to provide off-street parking for future electric vehicles, whether or not the infrastructure of the electrics to the properties and the surrounding estates is there to support future high levels of electricity demand, whether or not we've got digital infrastructure in place that can enable us to provide fast broadband speeds to our customers, but also things like if we had to, what would the possibilities be of a district heating system, or alternatively, what would be the requirements if we had to switch over onto a hydrogen power system for our boilers. On top of that, what we're also doing is we're developing new modelling. So we have a sustainability model that lets us know how all of our assets are performing at 3 different levels: an estate, a street, and a granular property level. So at any one time, we know what the performance of that property is on 39 different social factors plus the financial factors. And that helps us to understand where we should invest and where we should disinvest, the levels of investment that are capable within our portfolio, but also to allow us to move forward and plan in a smarter way. What we've developed is a digital twin of all of our portfolio. So we can use that to carry out virtual projects, and that will then, based on the components that we plan to install, allow us to understand what would be the potential outcomes based on the U value of the property and the potential heat demand. So level of kilowatt hours per square metre required to heat the property, level of carbon production, and also the heat and moisture effects upon the fabric of the building. So far what we've done is we've completed 8 pilots to determine what is the best package of works moving forward based on archetype and design. And that's allowed us to develop basically a toolkit of interventions that we can use based on those archetypes and designs of properties. So just going to go into a little bit of detail around one. This is a 1-bedroom property that we had in Colby Newham. It came back to us from a gentleman who'd refused works for around about 15 to 20 years. And as it became void, it was requiring £24,000 worth of works to bring it to a lettable standard. Unfortunately, though, that would not have given us a property that was actually fit for letting and not for future purposes. So we decided that we were going to adopt our full retrofit approach on this and see what would be the best result we could get and how much that would cost, what impacts it would make on the customer, and what benefits it would give to both the customer and the company. So I'm just going to go through a few images with yourself. So the images on the left are the before and the images on the right are the after. So what you can see there is the front elevation of this. It was a 31 square metre, 1-bedroom bungalow. It was supposed to be set up for older persons, but it was never really fit for purpose. On that first image, what you can also see is that even though the doors and the windows look very similar, the new windows are actually triple glazed, thermally insulated frames, and it's a GRP composite door with triple glazed cassettes. We've replaced all of the white guttering, and that is the new kitchen. So the old kitchen that was barely usable and only just made the grade, the new one, we've gone for an open plan living space. What you can see in there as well is some of the new technology. So there's a mechanical vent heat recovery unit. There's DC lighting, well, DC electrics all the way throughout. We have sensors throughout the system, and we have system controls that control things like the water, the heating, the mechanical vent recovery, that allows us to produce within the system the balance of a climate. So the climate balance is automated by the property to ensure that we always have the right levels of carbon monoxide, oxygen. The humidity isn't growing too high to allow damp and mold and condensation. So the home truly is smart and understands how to regulate itself. That there is a 99% finished bathroom. on the right, it's actually completely DDA compliant, apart from at the moment we've got some invisible adaptations to go in for grab rails and things. That we wanted it not to look like a hospital bathroom. We wanted it to look like something from a hotel, but still be completely compliant. We've put pocket doors in again to maximise the space, and we've just made it look a lot better. Some of the property technology that we've placed into this unit itself is a sun amp water heater, which is a really clever little unit. It heats the water really efficiently, using salt and vinegar crisp flavouring to do that, which always makes me laugh. But it is a really clever way of heating the water off an electric system. Our 13 ramp, which is remote access and monitoring platform, Internet of Things, that we've developed in-house, gives us full feedback around heat, humidity, oxygen, carbon dioxide levels within, and it gives triggers based on that. It links to accelerometers on the occupant, so if there's a trip or fall, it actually sends back to the next of kin. It controls components within the property to balance the microclimate within the house. It also gives us the ability to cut off, if we need to, the water, the electric to specific components, or if it has a gas property, we can cut off the gas supply as well. We fit the mechanical vent heat recovery, which is actually our primary source of heat within this property. We haven't got a boiler. That mechanical vent is providing all the heat that we need and recirculating the quality of air, fitted with the F3 filters. We have thermostat, which is our secondary heat system with a simple boost button if the customer feels that they do need additional heat. We've fitted an extreme low energy circuit throughout the property, which means that it runs off DC current, which means that the cabling is actually Ethernet cabling rather than electrical wiring. And all of the switches are kinetic switches, so therefore there's no wiring into any of the walls. It's all just done from a kinetic switch that can actually be taken off the wall if a customer needs it and used anywhere throughout the property. So that was a quick run through of what the project looked like. Now, some of the key findings that we have found from that were the property that I showed you there actually has vacuum pack internal wall insulation. Whilst we found it to be really efficient, and it's really thin, it's brilliant for fitting onto internal walls and get your thermal efficiency. The problems that we have is if a customer puts a nail through that wall, we have got great concerns that the perforation of the vacuum will cause significant damage to the efficiency of it. So that is a concern for us moving forward. We've moved away from the vacuum pack insulation for that exact reason, and we've gone with an aerogel product. The ventilation, it does, when you seal the property in, increase the heat and the humidity in there. So it's really key that you balance the climate within, which is why we've set up our ramp system to do that automatically, ensure we don't build up problems around around condensation and mold. The sun amp, while it's a very good product, it's also very heavy. It's 150 kilograms dry, so without the water in, which means if you plan to put it into a loft or a second story dwelling, it can have issues for delivery, getting it into situ. The things that we did find is, based on the information that's coming back, we've reduced the energy demand and the CO2 reduction by 76% in this property. We actually have a kilowatts per hour of 27 kilowatts per square metre per annum, and a U value of around about 0.25. But the thing that was a real shock to us, especially given what we've just heard, is we did all of this work and the EPC rating dropped from a category C to a category E. So that's everything from me on, around the costs. I nearly missed the important bit. So our current data shows that adopting the approach increases our spend by around 52% in our 30-year budget. But working alongside some of the other partners that we have, such as Savills and some industry partners, about reducing costs, and on top of that, the understanding that by 2045 we believe that the grid will be decarbonised, we're now expecting to increase our 30-year spend by around 35%. So that is actually the presentation. So it's just if there's any questions or thoughts or any feedback.
Thanks very much for that, Mark. There's a question came in as you were presenting there. Is the digital twin a BIM reference?
It's BIM plus, so it's BIM modelling, but it's so much more. So Whilst it does allow BIM modelling, it also has intelligent algorithms in there that do projection modelling for us. It allows us to simply drag and drop to do design elements, so we can put a different type of render and it understands, it's intelligent, it'll do the projection modelling out from us. So it's very similar to BIM, it's just we've took it to the next stage.
Oh, and there's another one just coming. How does the tenant power things using DC power, such as a TV?
So we have 2 circuits run through. So your TV, your fridge, and your oven, you have to have onto one circuit. But the majority of the electrics, at the moment, there is an inverter that's in production. So once the inverters, in effect, what happens with most products now is it's inverted from 240 volt down to a 5 or 12 volt, and then back into a 240 volt. That's how phone chargers, things like that work. The company that we're working with is trying to work on something similar for the high demand property, the high demand objects.
Cool. Thank you for your direct answers to the direct questions. That was all pretty helpful. I think what we'll do, we'll pass straight on to Sarah McClellan. So thanks very much for that, Mark. I will pass straight on to Sarah McClellan from Great Places Housing, who will share with us their experiences there. Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. Liam, I'm hoping you're going to share screen and bring the presentation up.
Yes, Sarah, just doing that.
Fantastic. So I'm just talking about one project that we've done in terms of retrofit. If we could start at the start rather than the end. Ah, awesome, fabulous. Right, next slide, please. There we are. So pretty much every housing association, we do all of our targets. Sorry, I should say, Sarah McClellan from Great Places Housing Group. So this is just talking about retrofit, so our existing assets. How on earth are we going to get them to zero carbon by when? 2038, 2025, 2050 maybe? But all housing associations, we all have targets in place to improve the energy performance of our homes. So they may vary. They may say, right, we're going to get them all up to a D, we're going to get them up to C, and then of course up to net zero or zero carbon. Next slide, please. And we all have variations on those dates. In the past, we've all done various programs of retrofits. We've done the loft insulation, we've done wall, we've done cavity, external, internal, party wall. Some of us have done underfloor heating, underfloor insulation. Then, of course, we've tried all the different types of new tech, the solar thermals, the air source heat pumps, the solar panels. But what we've never really got from any of this is what really works for our customers. So if you've done a loft insulation program, how do you know that it's actually meeting the performance that you were expected at point of design? And that's really what we want to talk about today. Next slide. I'm also speaking ridiculously fast because I'm aware we were due to finish at 11. So you just keep listening, that'd be great. So EPC. EPC, sorry, if you can go back one, EPC is great. Real advantage of being very, very simple. But as I've got there, Harry Potter, there's a bit of a dark arts to this, in that you can't just go forward on EPC saying, I want to improve all my homes to a C. Right, okay, in that case, I need to install LEDs in all properties and I'll get 4 points, because it's not that straightforward. You might get 1, you might get 4. You also have this issue with it that your boiler upgrade, depending on the insulation levels in the property, you might get 8 points or you might just get half a point. So it's not straightforward. It does, however, make loads of assumptions. Sorry, it's great for things like U values, the thickness of the insulation, but it has loads of assumptions within it. So the simplification of it is almost like its weakness. So it doesn't take into account the actual material performance of the performance of the material when it is fitted. Next slide, please. So what we started to find is that...
Sorry, Sarah, just to let you know, we don't actually finish till 50:30, so you've got all the time you want.
Case, relax. I started thinking, jeepers. Right, okay, in that case, yeah, I'll go much more slowly. Thank you, Liam. So the problem with the fault in our SAP is that we sit there and we go point scoring. We're always trying to get more points, but unlike Bruce Forsyth, points doesn't always mean prizes. We have a real issue with SAP in that at the moment, if you were to replace electric heating with gas boilers, you would actually improve your EPC score, improve your SAP, but actually you're then putting yourself at weakness in the future for the opportunity to decarbonise, which is where we want to go in terms of the long-term goals. You're also then potentially building an obsolescence, so you're fitting kit today, which we won't want to have in the not too distant future. You've also, because we're point scoring, we're ending up with higher long-term costs because we're doing one piece of kit, then another, and it also has repeated disruption to our customers. And of course, SAP has to recalculate. But that means then that EPCs that we had done in 2015 will no longer be valid by 2025. You know, I mean, we're constantly having to recalculate. So the scores that we currently have may not actually be of value in the future. Next slide, please. So where do we go with this? And also, where does it then sit for our customers? So as a housing association, we've tried to do some performance monitoring of our homes. We use Teeny Tag. It's a very simple little data logger. We call them the minions. And we fit them all around the properties. So we tend to use them where we have a customer who's maybe saying that it's really cold in the property, or they feel that they're spending a lot of money trying to heat the home. And the data logger records temperature and humidity. We cross-reference that against the meter, so the actual energy consumption, and we can start to see if the home is working as we should expect. So that gives us a bit of an indication, but it doesn't take into account the variables of how the occupant is actually using the home, nor does it take into account the weather or solar gain or things like that. We also have a thermal imaging camera, which you can see in the bottom right of the presentation, and that starts to identify where we have had some performance gap in the past. And so that particular one just shows where insulation is missing from the underside of a carport. Thermal imaging is fantastic because it saves you having to do a destructive survey, but it's not perfect. Next slide, please. So we had some homes which on paper look good. So they were pretty much done. So this is an estate of 1970s properties. They were all achieving a D, a low D in terms of energy performance. They were electrically heated. They'd been insulated in previous programs, and that had the cavity done, that had the loft done. But we were getting numerous phone calls and emails from customers saying, my home is not warm, I cannot heat my home, it's costing me a lot of money, the kids have to keep their coats on. We were having those sorts of levels of complaints. We're sitting there going, but these homes, they've achieved a D, they've got the cavity wall insulation, they've got double glazing, they've got newish doors. Why are these not working? And we really didn't understand it. So we started to identify that there were problems there. We started to identify, so for example, the cavity wall insulation. We noticed that there were voids, pockets within the cavity wall insulation. So we started to identify that actually it was failing. And what we didn't want to do was go back, take out the cavity wall insulation and then install again failed cavity wall insulation, or take out the loft insulation but not actually improved it. So what we wanted to understand is actually what impact this was going to have, or sorry, how can we make sure that we had quality performance associated with our works. Next slide, please. So we spoke to Knauf Insulation, who we've used in the past, and we spoke to them and they came forward to say that Knauf Energy Solutions were looking at exactly the same thing as us in terms of performance monitoring, and between us we wanted to set up a project to understand how we could use quality performance monitoring as part of our actual project. So we Knauf Energy Solutions, then they looked after the quality control from design through installation, and also did the monitoring and also the final outcome. So you can see here in the photographs, we've got some photographs of the pre-retrofit condition. So this loft insulation, it had been done at some point in the past, then you can tell it's been overlaid again, clearly quite badly. People have been up to do new cabling routes, you know, if we replace the shower. You know, there's lots and lots of different reasons why there's new cabling up there. But as you can see, it's quite messy and clearly not the insulation standard you would expect to see. Next slide, please. We also, as we started doing works, we found things like eggs, nesting, so we had birds nesting in the insulation. We also found rats. If you just go back just one picture, sorry, thanks Liam, that's a picture of some brick, brick inside, so brick rubble inside the cavity itself. So there's no way that the original cavity wall insulation would have been evenly distributed throughout that cavity wall if there's that amount of brick rubble. Next slide. So, and I love this picture, just the volume of rubble that was being extracted from those cavities. It really does show that they should never have been filled in the first place. And it also made sure that we knew that we had to do the remedial works to a very, very high standard to be able to ensure that the new cavity wall insulation was actually going to work. Next slide, please. So having done all the remedial works, Knauf Energy Solutions then used these sensor boxes. They're dotted all around the properties. And what they do is they look at humidity, temperature, CO2, and movement, so the movement of the people within the house as well. And so from that, they can then do I guess it's machine learning. So they can understand the actual energy performance of each individual house. And therefore, they were able to demonstrate then the improvements made, what impact that actually was on the house and on the occupants within the houses. Next slide, please. So you can see here that the detailing, so part of the design, as I say, from Knauf Energy Solutions was to pull together the really detailed loft specification and specific for the needs of these actual homes. One of the big things that we have for housing associations, if we say this is our loft spec, and we roll out the same loft spec in every single property, but really we need to think about each property as being an individual. So the loft insulation for this project then, it included the full clear out, but also the taping and sealing of every single servicing penetration, and also making sure that the insulation went to the eaves and that linked to the cavity wall insulation as well. It is so, so important that this is right. So that sealing there is so important because then you're ensuring that you're not building in future problems such as condensation, potential risk of damage to the timber in the future. Next slide, please. And yeah, this is the end result then. Much neater cabling, but also just a sea of evenly distributed loft insulation. Next slide. This is what I love. Ironically, Knauf Energy Solutions compares our houses to cars, which as an environmentalist, I sit there and go, this doesn't seem quite right, but it works. I can understand their metaphor. So when you buy a car, you get your miles, you get quoted your miles per gallon for that make and model, but then you stick a driver in it, and that driver can drive that car very differently and have very, very different actual miles per gallon results. So KES Energy Solutions, they're able to take into account the weather, take into account the customer, so that all of our results are just about the property or just about the car. So in the before retrofit model there, you've got Jeremy Clarkson in an old energy efficient car. Then in the after retrofit, Jeremy Clarkson is in a new, very energy efficient car. But he wants to know how much that car or the house will actually require if you ignore the driver. And that's what they can do through the modeling. So how much is Jeremy Clarkson actually saving if he drove his old house if he drove his new house in the same way that he drove his old house? So next slide, please. You can see then here, this is the graph showing the differences in pre and post retrofit. So this is just how much the house uses with the person taken out as such. So for us, it's really, really important. So we were able to see, so I've just picked out a few there. So the savings to the customer. So a lot of the customers didn't see any real savings, but what they did see or what they did feel was a warmer house, a house that they're more able to live in. And feel more comfortable in. But the savings, so if they were to continue to run those houses, these new build houses, new houses, as if they were running their old ones, the minimum saving we were seeing was £375 a year, and the maximum, the biggest savings we saw was £1,100 per year. And that's significant for our customers. So the good news is for the whole of Christmas last year, all over the heating season, we didn't get any complaints at all from any of these customers saying that they could no longer, or that they were struggling to heat their homes. Next slide, please. So we just did it on Retrofit, but there was also a program doing some new builds as well. And again, it was looking at the assured performance of those homes. And what they were seeing with those ones, with the new builds, so that's the graphs on the left-hand side, was they're seeing about 17% savings. So that's demonstrating that having the real quality assurance going through the entire project, making sure that the detailing is right, and then having the performance monitoring actually has an impact on how contractors are installing the kit. For us, our homes then are the 4 bars on the right hand side, so they obviously have a higher energy demand. They're older houses, we're never going to get them to new build standards. They're also a little bit larger in terms of space, which then needs to be heated, but you can see significant savings for our customers there as well in the post retrofit energy demand. Next slide, please. So what have we learned from this program? We've learned an awful lot. So we've really learned no more box ticking. We can't just go, right, we're just going to do LED lights, we're just going to do loft insulation. It's how are we doing it? How are we doing the quality control? For us as well, then, the EPC is only the starting point. It's useful. It's a really useful indicator of the energy performance of the homes, but actually we need to understand how those homes are actually running. Customer engagement is crucial. I cannot stress that enough. And we're very lucky that we've got a customer liaison officer on board who's able to speak to the residents about every stage of the project. But attention to detail and the specification, I cannot stress this one enough. And particularly, so Jonathan noted earlier, the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, those demonstrator applicants will require the ability to be able to demonstrate the baseline performance of the homes, then after be able to actually measure the actual performance and demonstrate cost reduction. So unless we have some sort of performance monitoring, it just won't work. We're also very much aware that the government policy is changing away from theoretical performance as shown through the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. So yeah, so so that's the specification. Then working with our contractors, that's crucial. They had to change policies and procedures. The old loft insulation, it used to take them a couple of hours to do it. Now it takes them a full day because we've moved on with our loft spec and we're using the same one time and time again. But it means then that we're actually looking at that detail as opposed to just saying, please can you give us some loft insulation? And then going forward, the performance monitoring, how are we going to assess that the materials being fitted actually work as the design standard? And that's it from me. I kept going with it. I've only got a little bit of time. Sorry, I could have slowed down a lot more.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I hope everybody can hear me. Yes, yeah. Has anybody got any specific questions that you can put to the Q&A or put your hand up if you want to speak directly from the information we've just heard from Sarah? I'll broaden that out to questions in general from any of the speakers, and just while I think about that, I'll sort of start the ball rolling, as it were. There's a couple of things that, and to be honest, I'm not from your background. I don't work in this. There's a couple of things that jump out at me and be interested to know what you think. The EPC rating, Mark said yours had dropped on the property you did, and Sarah said it's a start, but, and I suppose I open this up to everybody, is there a need for a different metric, whether that be a new metric altogether? Separating's got its problems, etc.
We've moved away from it entirely as an organisation, in all honesty. It's great we've got that there for all our properties that we did have. We now measure all of our properties in U-value performance, so kilowatt hours per square metre. That's how we're moving forward. That's the targets that we're setting. So we're not setting any targets around EPCs, it's around those values. And then, as Sarah said, the reason that we're putting a lot of sensors and Internet of Things options into the property and making them smarter homes is to ensure that you're getting those returns that you expect from your components. Again, the same way you put the flare cameras before and after, because those are really key ways to understand that you've got your continuity and your air tightness. We do air tightness tests. So yeah, we haven't even bothered. We did it this time as an example, but we don't even bother now with EPCs once we've made the improvements, because we know that they're not going to be relevant.
Can I just pick up on one question that's come in on that, Mark, then? How do you explain the EPC going from a C to an E? What were the...
It was the two. So we took out we put in the sun amp, which is classed as an immersion heater, because there's nothing that covers it. Okay. The main electric heating type was classified, because there was no main heating type, because it wasn't required, was classified as electric heating because it's thermostat, when actually it was a secondary heat source. And actually the thermal efficiency came from the structure of the building. So by the time we'd gone through all of those improvements, because the EPC hasn't kept pace with the industry, they acted as a negative impact on our overall EPC.
Yeah, the metrics outdated, as it were.
Unfortunately, yeah.
We had no EPC improvement, despite doing all the works and despite being able to demonstrate that the homes are definitely working better. And that's because the poor old EPC can't take into account failing materials. So it can't take into account that, it's just a tick box, cavity wall insulation tick, but actually it wasn't fitted correctly and it was failing. So there's no benefit to us having that EPC, but more importantly, no benefit to our customer having that EPC.
Yeah.
Can I just make a couple of points? Obviously, we already develop SAP on behalf of government, and it's probably worth just saying what that is. It's a compliance tool for regulation, for building regulation.
Yeah.
And the challenge is that it gets used for all sorts of different things, which is developed as a simple tool, and it's collecting some data, and then it gets used for all sorts of different things, which it was never intended for. And this is kind of the challenge where we get to, that actually there aren't that many tools that actually need to do what you guys want it to do. And so then people end up either using SAP or RD SAP for purposes which are kind of, what does the future hold? And SAP's not going to give you the answer for that. Although, a lot of the methodology behind it, a lot of the things that are in it, it collects data about the U values, it collects data about heating systems and all that kind of stuff, is actually a good starting point. And actually with some of our own tools, we kind of use that. We have our own version, which we can then build upon, which can then be used in a different context.
Yeah. We've done the same. We pulled all the data out of Landmark, and then we've taken all that Landmark data to be the starting point for our digital twin project. Yeah, because it's all there as the baseline for your projections.
Yeah, and it's a starting point, and as Sarah was saying, it's about talking to customers, it's about understanding the actual building, bringing in quality and all that kind of stuff that actually should also be part of that key decision-making process.
Yeah.
The other thing that's also worth mentioning is that obviously one of the things about Brexit is that EPCs is a European thing, and actually government is looking at what they do with EPCs going forward. So now is a really good time to lobby government to actually make them perhaps more something useful. I know that BEIS are thinking about that.
Can I just cover something that's come in, Gwyn? You perhaps maybe answered that. Will the RD SAP help anymore? I think that the tool's for a certain purpose. Do you think, somebody's asked, will the new SAP and subsequently RD SAP changes help with the scores, with the evaluation, I suppose, of that?
So I think some of Mark's challenge around the EPC going down is that one of the key things within the SAP is the carbon factor of the grid. And so electricity as a heating source gets marked down because the carbon factors within SAP are somewhat out of date. So the SAP that gets used in regulation and RD SAP. So that's why I'm saying that John mentioned our home quality mark tool that actually uses up-to-date carbon factors of what the grid is now. And so it's actually possible for us to kind of build upon the data that you might already have and actually give slightly different answers. What comes onto the EPC and what's in regulation is a slightly different question, because that's controlled by government and their regulation. But it is possible to give a better answer if people desire.
Oh, thank you. Just a direct one for you, Sarah. What was the name of the company you used for the quality performance monitoring?
Oh, Knauf Energy Solutions.
Right.
I'm more than happy if you want to email me, sarah.mcclelland@greatplaces.org.uk. I will happily send all contacts, or maybe if there's a update going out from Liam, I can include that in the bottom.
Yeah, similarly, if you want to come to us and we can pass those things on, that's not a problem. A question for our BRE colleagues. What is the tool BRE use for design?
So we use a number of different tools. So like I mentioned, we have our own kind of tool that's based upon SAP. So called BREDEM, which evolves over time. And then we also use commercially available energy modeling tools. So that kind of side of things as well. So we don't just necessarily use one. It depends on the type of work and what's required. So yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much. Has anybody got any other burning questions they'd like to see covered? No. Okay, it's cool. We're coming to the end of our time. Thanks again to all of our presenters today. I think that was informative sessions from all of you, and certainly food for thought, and from the landlords particularly, to be able to say, right, what are we going to do? What's my organisation going to do around this? So there's plenty there. And as Sarah just said, I'm sure Mark will be the same. Be happy to share further.
Yeah.
Anybody who needs anything on that. Liam said we will be sending a recording of the session today round to delegates. So hopefully all the gremlins that got into the works about half an hour ago, we can smooth all those out in that, and everything will be clear there. Thanks to everybody for coming today. Wouldn't be the same without you. We do have a full list of webinars around this topic and others, so do check in on my NHC, and there'll be plenty there for you to look. Hopefully, everybody registered for this event via my NHC, so it should be straightforward for you there. As well as the recording, we'll send a short feedback survey, and we do like to hear what you think, so please do complete that. Finally, just thanks again to our campaign partners, Halton Housing, Together Housing Group, 13, Liverpool City Regions Housing Associations, and our colleagues at Consortium Procurement. Thanks to everybody for today. I hope you found it really useful, and I'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Cheers.